Not sure where to start with your marriage adjustment application? The biggest question every couple has in this early stage of this process is, where do I start? I will walk you through 5 different steps you have to take to know everything you need to know about your marriage adjustment process. And make sure to watch to the end because each step we cover helps you avoid a mistake you might face at the next stage of this process. If you're new to our channel, I'm Margarita. This channel is designed to help you handle your own marriage green card without hiring a lawyer. Although my husband and I are both attorneys, I'm also an immigrant, and my immigration journey was very complicated to make sure I help you avoid that exact same experience today. Look, I broke this video into steps because that's where I myself made mistakes, and that's where I see the vast majority of couples make mistakes as well, since the information I share here isn't available anywhere else. First, the first thing you have to decide on is when to get married and start on this process. Sounds simple, right? But there's so much second guessing around this. For instance, if you or your spouse entered the US on a tourist visa, you might be asking yourself, okay, since we decided to get married, do I need to wait the 90 days or should I initiate this process sooner? Same if you entered on ESTA visa waiver. Do I wait the 90 days? Or is it okay to start this process sooner? It's a challenge because all the information online is outdated, contradicting, and it doesn't address your specific situation. If you're on OPT or on a work visa, you might be wondering when would be the best time to get married and apply for this process. Plus, you might be wondering how initiating this process will impact your current status. When it comes to au pairs, it's especially tough because they need to decide if they want to finish their program first or actually start on this process. But deciding on when to get married and start this process is literally the number one thing you have to figure out before you move on to the next step. And that's where couples make a ton of mistakes and jeopardize their cases. So many couples come to us freaking out because the immigrant spouse entered the US on a tourist visa and they were not aware they got married 2 weeks later. Then they read on the internet that it's a big no-no and they could be accused of fraud and misrepresentation. Either way, just don't do that. You need to research properly and know exactly what you're doing before you're doing it to avoid any potential issues. Look, I always imagine immigration as a linear step-by-step process. I mean, it is administrative law after all. And so long as you know what you're doing on each step, you don't get stuck and you don't get delayed. On the other hand, we've also had many couples over time come to us after sitting on their application and this entire process for 6 months plus, simply because they are experiencing analysis paralysis, not sure what decision to make. I often wonder about this and ask them why they didn't reach out to an attorney for a consult to help them learn more about this process and make a decision, and I always hear one of 2 things. One, they did reach out to attorneys, to multiple actually, and each attorney had something different to say, which confused them further. Somehow, each attorney has their own experience, which does make sense if they don't handle these specific marriage adjustment cases all the time. Or 2, they reached out to an attorney but are still confused and not sure how to proceed. Here's why deciding on when to get married and initiate this process is so important. It's all about strategy and strategically planning for these things. The green card process can be long. We just had someone inside our method approved for a green card exactly 1 year after they applied. During this time, you will not be able to travel overseas unless your travel permit gets approved, which is very rare. So you do need to be prepared to be stuck in the US for at least 1 to 2 years. I have a couple in my program right now, and they were supposed to fly to Southeast Asia for a wedding, all tickets and hotels paid for, but since this green card process is way more important, the foreign spouse won't be able to travel and attend the wedding. And it is important to consider both international and domestic travel. Let's say you or your spouse overstayed their tourist visa. You haven't filed any documents with the USCIS yet, and you're considering traveling from Virginia to Florida to visit family during holidays together. Okay, so for an immigrant with an expired authorized B2 stay, traveling domestically is scary. Hell, even driving a car is scary. I hear about this from immigrants daily, on top of remembering my own immigration experience very well as well. Another thing to plan around is moving. That's another thing we run into with our members all the time. If, let's say, you initiate this process, submit your application to the USCIS, and then suddenly move, that's an issue. So many cases get denied all the time because the USCIS does not properly record the address change, and frankly, often applicants don't know how to properly change the address on their end, but more often than not, it's the USCIS. It's a well-known thing that they like sending requests for evidence to the old address on file, while the denial notice always arrives at the new address. So please be mindful of that. If you have a move coming up, it might be best to submit your application when you are at the new address. All right, just to recap, the first step is for you to determine when to get married and when you want to submit your marriage adjustment application. It's especially important now that the USCIS fees are about to increase. And by the way, you can learn more about the upcoming USCIS fee increase here. Okay, second step is for you both to make a decision regarding name change. Here's what I mean. Are you planning on changing your last name as a part of this process? And that question specifically applies to foreign spouses considering a name change as a part of this immigration process. Here's where immigrants always get this wrong. They very often want to change their last name, but they think it will be super complicated. Even you might be assuming that you first need to change your name on all the documents like passport, other IDs, etc., and only then will you be able to use this name on your immigration paperwork. I mean, that's what I thought when I was going through my immigration. My maiden name was provided throughout the entire application, and then, during the interview, I had a really tough time. My interviewing officer felt the need to question me regarding my intentions and even suggested that maybe my marriage was fraudulent since I did not intend on using my husband's last name. Kind of shows you how culturally different we all are. It is absolutely not a requirement to change your last name, so if you are not planning on doing it, that's totally fine and acceptable. It's 100% your choice. But if you decide to change your name, you actually have to make the decision right after deciding on when to get married, and here's why it's so important. Changing your last name as a part of this process is the easiest way to handle your name change, but you do need to know that before you even apply for a marriage license. Very often the marriage license will ask you if you're planning on changing your last name, and you should make that selection there. In some states, you can select a new name directly on the marriage certificate, and you should do it if it is your intention to go through with a name change. Just to illustrate it as an example, we had a few members from California. In California, or at least in those specific counties, you can choose to take your husband's last name on the marriage certificate, and they didn't do that at the time because they thought it would complicate the process or maybe even make it longer. Ultimately, we helped them understand this process better, and they still got their green cards with the desired new names, but you do need to make sure you're doing this right to avoid some additional stress, just speaking from experience. Either way, for the purposes of this video, you need to know that your marriage certificate will serve as a proof of name change. Talk about this in detail in this video, so make sure to check it out if the whole name change topic is still a bit confusing. Alright, so step number 3. Let's imagine you know when to get married, you know how to handle the name change. What do you do now? Start collecting all the bona fides you have. First, it is important to include evidence of shared finances. There are a bunch of examples in our free bona fide marriage evidence list below, and definitely make sure to download it before you go, but here are some examples. We're talking joint bank account statements, joint credit card statements, joint tax returns, joint property deeds or lease agreements, insurance policies that list both spouses as the beneficiary, and any other financial documents showing commingling of finances. This type of evidence is one of the most important types to the USCIS. You will also want to show them that you're living together at the same address. Just to give you some examples, you can include both of your driver's licenses with the same addresses on it, utility bills, insurance statements, lease agreements, or mortgage statements in both of your names, and letters that you receive at that specific address. Then, proof that you have children together is obviously huge. Proof that you're raising children together from either your current or previous marriages is one of the strongest pieces of evidence. You can include children's birth certificates listing one of the spouse's names if from a previous marriage, adoption certificates, school or medical records listing the step-parent as an emergency contact for the stepchildren. If you're currently pregnant or trying to get pregnant, you can include an original letter from your doctor attesting to a current pregnancy or fertility treatments. That's obviously in addition to plenty of photos and showing your life before you got married. You want to include evidence from the very beginning of your relationship if possible. You can include things like text messages, digital flight tickets from any trips or visits, previous lease agreements, emails, social media screenshots if you post pictures together, and anything else that could show your relationship building. Remember, the USCIS categorizes this evidence into weak, medium, and strong, so you should 100% do the same. And obviously, you might not have everything I just mentioned. You can go ahead and get it in the meantime or supplement your application at a different time. Again, it's all about strategy here. Also, I will right away clarify something. It's a common misconception that couples have that if the spouse entered on a tourist visa, she or he doesn't have a social security number, so, we cannot get this evidence of joint finances or whatever. That is actually not the truth at all. You can definitely get a ton of this evidence without a social. It's about doing some additional homework ahead of time, which will save you a ton of time later on. Again, remember, the whole point is to do your best and get that interview waived. There is nothing better than getting that green card in the mail instead of going through a stressful interview experience. Trust me. Okay, so number 4, let's still imagine that you don't have that much stuff, like evidence-wise, and you're really overthinking this whole bona fide evidence thing. What should you do in that case? First, include evidence that other people, preferably family members here in the United States, know about your relationship. If you receive cards or letters from them with all the congratulations on your recent wedding, you should definitely include that. Plus, all the wedding expenses. If you paid for the venue, food catering, rings, include the receipts with your application. Also, consider reaching out to family and friends, asking them to prepare letters of support on your behalf. We made an entire video covering this topic and you can watch it here. Plus, make sure those letters are notarized. Alright, so number 5. From here, you will need to fill out all the necessary forms and put your entire application together. Understand what happens next, and actually be prepared to deal with the USCIS for the next few years. Here's what I will say. I know we just covered a lot, but it is still such a small portion compared to everything that goes into this process. If you already feel overwhelmed and you would just rather sit down and get it done in under 1 month without any back and forth with an attorney, just on your own time, our marriage immigration method is for you. You can watch an interview with our successful member to learn more about this approach here. Otherwise, thank you for watching and we will see you next week.